Hey you guys, so today's video is going to be a tutorial on this kind of faded out half skull look. I'm definitely not the first person to do a look like this, but I love these kind of classic looks on Halloween, so if you guys want to know how to get this look, then just keep watching. Alright, so I'm going to work on my eyebrow, well only one, because the other one's going to be covered up. And I'm just taking my Anastasia Chocolate Brow Powder Duo. Also, I did go ahead and apply a layer of the Kat Von D Lock-It foundation all around my face, even though we are going to be covering half of it with the white face paint. I wanted it to look really nice and like faded from white into my skin tone, so I just applied the foundation all over. So on the skull side, I'm going to start out by mapping out the shape of the skull, and I'm just using a nude eye pencil. You can look at reference photos, whatever you think is easiest for you. I'm just doing a really basic design. I didn't want to get too intricate, so now I'm just mapping out the lower jaw. And these lines are going to be covered up later by paint, but it's just a good guide to use in the beginning. And then I just mapped out half of the little skeleton nose, and then I'm going to outline the eye. And I'm making sure to get up above my eyebrow so I don't have to cover it with like a glue stick or scar wax or anything like that. So now I'm going in with the face paint, and this is the Mayron Paradise White face paint. You can totally use Snazaroo if you want, if you have access to that instead of Mayron. You can find the Snazaroo at like Michael's or any art supply store. So as I'm applying this white face paint, I'm making sure it's the most opaque and whitest white in the outer portion of the skull, because I want it to go from really bright white to kind of faded out into my skin tone. So I'm making sure that the face paint is most concentrated there, and then I'm taking whatever's left over on my brush and just using that to feather it over. So once I feel like I have enough face paint on, I'm going to take this white eyeshadow from the Suva Beauty Cupcakes and Monsters palette, and I'm just going to take this and set the outer portion of the skull to make it even more white. You can use a translucent powder if you want to, but this just made it a little more opaque. And then once I get to the center line where it's going to be divided, I'm just taking that brush and kind of feathering it back and forth to blend out the white even more. So now I'm going back over those guidelines with the light brown eyeshadow, and this is Bake Sale by Makeup Geek. I'm using a Smith 203 to outline those, and then I'm going in with a tiny little fluffy brush and filling in those areas. So for these negative spaces on the skull, we're going to be using a lot of shading, so I'm going to use primarily a light brown, a dark brown, and a black eyeshadow. I didn't want to use just black because I felt like that might look a little too flat. So now I'm going in with the darker brown, which is Mocha by Makeup Geek. I'm just doing the same thing, outlining and then kind of feathering it in. I don't want to cover up the whole entire negative space because that would just be negating what I just did with a lighter brown, but I'm just going around the perimeter, adding some shading so it looks a little bit more three-dimensional. And then I'm also just drawing a thin line to connect from the mouth to that cheek area. And then I'm going in with a black eyeshadow, and I'm just doing the same exact thing, covering a little less space as I go, so it goes from like a black to dark brown to light brown gradient. I'm also using this to outline all of the spaces, and I'm using a really tiny little brush for this step. This is the Tight Liner brush by Smith Cosmetics. It creates a really nice sharp line and does a good job of feathering out the product as well. So now I'm going to start mapping out my eye, and this is where I had a little bit of trouble because I wasn't really sure how I was going to do this look. I was just kind of winging it as I went along. I started out with the black, and then I was like, wait, no, I want to start with a light brown. So I went in with a light brown, and then I decided to fill in the entire eye socket with that. Later on, you're going to see that I removed the inner portion of that eye socket area with a makeup wipe so that there's no closure to the eye. It just kind of fades into my face. You'll see what I'm talking about later, but for now, I'm just going to fill in that entire area. And then I'm going in with that darker brown, and I'm just going to shade the left side of that eye socket and a little bit of the top. I'm going to keep it to this side though and not blend it out too far over because, like I said, I want the eye socket area to fade from like darker to lighter the closer it gets to the normal side of my face. And then I'm just doing the same thing with the black, using that tiny little tight liner pencil, outlining it first, making sure not to get any fallout on the white paint because that's a bitch to get off. And then I'm just using that brush to pull that black eyeshadow into the eye socket to blend it out. Now I'm just taking a little bit more of that white eyeshadow on a big fluffy brush and just blending it over the inner half of that eye socket, just so it fades a little bit more naturally. So for the normal side, I'm going to use this nude lipstick by Ofra. It's called Dubai. And once I get to the center of my lips, I'm just going to take my finger and blend it over to the skeleton side. And now I'm just taking a fluffy brush and applying that light brown in the nose socket area. And then I'm going to take the darker brown and apply that to the outline. You guys know the drill by now. And then skeletons sometimes do have that little divot that comes down in the center of the nose, so that's what I'm drawing right there. And I'm just blending in that darker brown a little bit more and then adding a tiny bit of black to the outline. And then I'm going to start on the teeth, and I was not being precise on this. I know that's not as many teeth as a normal human has, that's fine. But basically I'm just going in and making these teeth shapes, making sure to leave little spaces in between each one where I can shade later. And then as they get closer to the center of my face, I'm going to make the lines a little bit lighter so they fade better. So once I get the basic teeth shape down, I decided to go back and add some more details on the rest of the skull. I'm going to go back to the teeth later, but for now I just wanted to make sure to add some little details around each edge, I guess you would call it. So I'm taking that lighter brown, using a really tiny liner brush to make a line, and then using that pencil brush to kind of smooth it out and blend it upwards. This is just going to create some shadow and highlight and all that stuff. Then I'm also taking just a tiny bit of black and just accentuating the lowest part of that line as well. And I'm just doing this all around my nose, around the cheek, around the eye, basically anywhere that would be like protruding. And once again, this just helps to add a little bit more dimension and make it look a little more realistic. And then I'm also doing this kind of furrowed brow line that some skulls have, just kind of curving it upwards with the light brown. So taking that light brown, I'm going to go in between each tooth and shade that area. And I'm making sure not to connect the tops of these teeth with that light brown, if that makes sense. So I want it to make it look like the white is extending down to like the roots of the teeth. So I'm just fading this out in between each tooth. Then I'm going to go in with some white eyeshadow on an angled brush and kind of fill in those negative spaces in between the shading so it looks like the teeth are extending upwards a little bit into the rest of the skull. So now I'm just adding some details to the teeth, making them look a little more realistic, so I'm rounding out the sides of them so they're not super square, and then in some of the back teeth I'm adding dips in the center so they look like molars, and then just kind of filling out anywhere I need to. So now I'm going to work on the other eye, and I'm just going to take the same colors that I used on the shading and just apply that to my eye. So I'm starting with the light brown all over the crease, taking that darker brown and extending that to the outer V and then a little bit on my lid. And then I'm just going to take some eyeliner. This is Trooper by Kat Von D, my favorite. Just going to make a quick wing, fill it in. And then I'm just going to apply a little bit of that darker eyeshadow on the lower lash line and blend that out with a lighter brown. Now I'm just popping on some lashes. These are Starlets by House of Lashes. I was going to leave the other eye blank, but I felt like it was a little too naked, so I'm just going to really quickly do the same makeup on that side. I'm not worrying about the eyeshadow on that though, because the shading is basically already the eyeshadow. Alright, and that's it for my tutorial. I really hope you guys liked this one. Let me know if there are any other specific Halloween looks you want me to do, and thanks for watching. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!